I want to start here. If you're not familiar with the story, House of Delegates member who is also a public school teacher at Oak Hill High School in the state of West Virginia, a guy named Elliott Pritt, was charged. These are federal charges. I have put in the chat the PDF of the charges so that you can read them yourself. And I'll go over what's in the document in a minute if you don't have the stomach for it. But Elliott Pritt got elected first time back in 2022, 2023, somewhere in that area. He was a very young member of the House of Delegates. He represents the Fayette County area, give or take. Since he was originally elected, they did the change with the House of Delegates to make it the 100-member House of Delegates. So it's a little different than where he was. But still, he represents the Fayette area, especially Fayetteville, especially Oak Hill, where he teaches. He got charged with grooming and having sexual activity with a girl who was in 8th grade when it started, up until the current time when she reported it to her family. The family then reported it, and charges were filed, and a federal case was brought. Again, he is entitled to his day in court, presumption of innocence and all that. The details in the actual document are pretty damning, and it's all digital. He used Roadblocks, the video game. If you're not familiar with that, I know my kids played it. It was one of those things where we had to have a lot of conversations like, hey, the chat room on these things are just vile pits of badness. So he used Roadblocks to interact with this female who's unidentified because obviously they're a minor still, and at least one other female that we know of. And then you read through this document because, listen, the publications and the news outlets have to cover these things a certain way. The way they have to cover it and the way you have to talk about it publicly because of constraints, you don't get the full picture of what he's being accused of here. If you read the document, it lays it out. So if you read it in like West Virginia Watch, Amelia nicely wrote a piece. West Virginia Watch is where I write. Metro News or any of the other reporters who are covering this, the local TV stations, because this has gone national now. I know my buddy Jim Loki covered it on Fox 5 DC. National outlets are picking up because obviously he's a politician with the Republican Party, although he's switched parties. We'll get into that in a minute. It's getting played up pretty big nationally. The course of events in the charges is pretty telling. And the person who wrote it did a really good job laying it out. He got into their personal life. He started sharing personal details, allegedly. Then came the declarations of "I love you." Then came the request for photographs. Then sharing photographs. The photographs got increasingly more explicit, both him sending them and him requesting them and receiving them. Then after he got the explicit photographs, started getting video of sex acts. And this culminated in him getting this female to show up and meet him in his classroom at Oak Hill High School, allegedly, according to the document, at least 5 to 10 times for full-blown sexual activity that was oral and manual. And I'm going to leave it at that because I'm just getting sick talking about it. But when you just hear that he did certain things, you don't get until you read the charges. Now, again, the charges are always written to sound as bad as possible. He's entitled to his day in court, but this is pretty damning stuff. One thing that really bothered me about this, because as most of you know, I do caregiving, and my children's maternal grandfather, who's actually in the hospital right now, I was actually sitting in the hospital with him taking a shift when this news broke. So I was kind of limited, and I'm kind of glad it is because I got very upset about it. He represents Fayetteville way back when he did the party switch in 2023. And the allegations in this indictment start in 2024. So this part of it that I'm going to talk about is right before all of this happened. I was writing for the Fayette Tribune, which is the local Fayette County paper. I was doing commentary for him. I'm not a journalist. I don't claim to be. Now, I do journalistic principles. I try to uphold the standards of the publications that I'm published in or anywhere that I appear in, whether it's TV, radio, whatever. I have some very trusted journalists in my, inner circle that I talk to frequently to try to be a professional about my writing craft that I take very seriously. Very well-respected journalists. I have an editor who's amazing that has pretty much read everything I've ever published, and I run stuff through them because that individual is also an attorney. So on top of being an editor, they're an attorney and a wonderful, wonderful person. So I'm very careful with what I do to try to be professional. But um, TJ Meadows, who does a great job with Metro News Talkline. If you're not familiar with West Virginia, that's the premier media outlet for anything going on in West Virginia. It was Hoppy Kercheval's for a year now. TJ and Dave does a great job with it. TJ does an excellent job. He did a commentary and he said, basically paraphrasing and titled, Elliott Pritt fooled us. And he talked about how he'd never had any interactions with him that he knows of, but because of just from news headlines and observing Elliott Pritt's conduct in the House of Representatives, this would have been one of the last people you would have ever guessed of doing something like this. And a lot of that was based on the last session of the West Virginia legislature and the debate over Rayleigh's Law. If you're not familiar, for the uninitiated, and those of you from Addison that are a little slow on the uptake, Rayleigh's Law was the last day of the session. It is a piece of legislation where a family could not just automatically homeschool their child to get out of an abuse investigation. It failed. But Elliott Pritt was one of the people who really basically held the floor of the House for a while trying to get this passed, very theatrical, using every trick in the book to try to get this thing shoved through at the last minute, went deep into the night. You can look all this up on your own. There's pretty well-known pictures because they're getting used now of him with his head in his hands, so upset that they couldn't get this law passed, and his statements about protecting children and stuff. And of course, how that plays now with what he's been accused of. Back in 2023, 2024 timeframe, I was writing for the Fayette Tribune. I was doing commentary. Now, the thing about the Fayette Tribune, it was a small local paper. Like a lot of local outlets, it was struggling. It had actually just consolidated. They had taken 3 papers, put them into one paper. They took the Montgomery paper and the Fayette paper, and I forget the other one, put them together. I know basically the people that were keeping it going single-handedly, a brother and sister team, and the people that ran it. I just reached out to her and I'm like, look, I'm doing all this national stuff. I'd like to write more about West Virginia. You don't have to pay me. I'll give it to you for free. Don't do that, kids. But I was in a situation where like, I just want to help. Let me do it. They have a parent paper. I'd actually talked to the person that ran their opinion page. He wasn't interested in me writing for them or helping with them even for free, which, you know, I guess you don't like views and money and don't know how to run a business, but that's neither here nor there. But anyway, so I was writing commentary for the Fayette Tribune for a period of time. Love doing it. In fact, you look at the newspapers right behind me right here. If you're watching on the video, if you're on the podcast, I apologize. Those are Fayette Tribunes, because for somebody like me that came up mostly writing digital and publishing digitally, it was really cool that the paper that's on my dad's desk in print had his son in it. And I kept a couple of them, still have them. Very proud of the work I did there. It was a great opportunity. Eventually, like all small papers, the editor I worked with got cut. Her job got axed. They didn't want to work with me anymore. I didn't really want to work with anybody but her. And by then I started working with West Virginia Watch, and I have more stuff with West Virginia coming up that we'll talk about at another venue. But at the time, I'm covering Fayetteville as well as I can. So like when the tornadoes hit, I was writing about Fayette County, Fayetteville, Oak Hill, Montgomery, those areas. I wrote about Montgomery extensively. I know this area really well. I went to the church I basically grew up with all of my teen years until I was 20 and enlisted and left, is in Hyco, West Virginia. That's Route 60 and Route 19. That's the big brick church right there in the intersection. You can't miss it. So we have deep, deep ties in Fayette County. My father actually pastored that church for 26 years. So we have very deep roots in this county. Now, you all know me as Andrew Donaldson from media and whatever. When I cover a story in Fayette County, even back then, it wasn't Andrew Donaldson and whatever you've seen me on before. It was still, oh, you're Allen's boy. So I had contacts, I had connections, I had people I could talk to. When the Elliott Pritt story bumped up, because he was elected as a Democrat and then switched to Republican about a year later, I wrote about it and I wrote an opinion piece. And I did what I always do, trying to be a good member of the media. I reached out to him. I said, hey, I'm writing this piece. I'm sending this out. Do you want to put a comment on it? Do you want to say anything? Here's roughly what I'm going to say. Do you want to leave me a comment? I'll add it. And I didn't get a response, which is no big deal. I'm a nobody from nowhere. I'm kind of used to that. I'm a girl dad. I'm used to being ignored. So I just pressed ahead with it. Now, once it published, because I'd sent him my contact information, he reached out to me. So when this scandal broke, I had almost forgotten about it, but I went back and went through my text messages that I kept from him and my writing notes because I had forgotten about this as well. He had reached out after that comment. So I went back through the text messages and I went through my writing notes and I went and reread the piece. You can read it. It's still up at Fayette Tribune. I'll stick the link. It's not really, it's just bread and butter commentary stuff about him politically being expedient and switching parties. It's really neither here nor there. He said to me that he thought the article was fair, but he was upset about one piece of it. He said the party flipping thing he didn't think was fair, and sent me kind of a long message of like, "Hey, I was a Republican for 7 years, but that doesn't fit the narrative that people want to use right now." He's like, "I switched parties multiple times, but one of them was from independent and back, and then one time I switched to for one election to vote for somebody in the Democratic primary." Back when West Virginia was still a predominantly Democratic state. Guilty, I did that too back in the day because I wanted to vote for my aunt for circuit clerk. You and that was so he felt that was a little unfair. I did what any good writer would do. I was like, well, I tell you what, I'm thinking of this small local paper I'm trying to help out that's struggling. I was like, why don't we just do a whole piece on it? I can write a feature in it. If you'll sit for an interview, we can talk about your bio, your background. We can bring all this to light. We can wrap it, put it in a bow, let people know about it. You want to take a shot at me? That's fine. I don't care. I'm a big boy, but it'll be good print for the paper. You can get your name out there and all this. And I'm bringing that up because I found those text messages and those notes, and then reading back on it now, one, it's just weird that you're talking to somebody that was capable of that because you never really know. And two is the course of events that happened after that. I reached out and I said, normal stuff. I need your bio. Tell me some things that are interesting about you, things I can look at. And I wanted a couple things that I could go, to the school system, and I could go to the Fayette area and Fayetteville and Oak Hill and, ask some people about to kind of build the piece out. Just normal writing stuff. And he made some comments, and out of my writing notes, I had a couple things I wanted to ask him about. Again, individually, not nefarious. In hindsight, are they? I don't know. Maybe they are. He mentioned to me about his Air Force career. So we talked about we were both in the military, talked through some of that. He talked about being in Japan in the Air Force, working on C-130s, things like that, talked about his rank. And I made a note asking him further about his service because he had an odd number. Odd number doesn't mean anything in and of itself, but you have, especially for the Air Force, you have 4-year enlistments unless you do a 6-year on the initial. So anytime there's an odd number of service, you ask because there's a story there. Not necessarily nefarious. I've got an odd number because of my medical situation when I got out, but you just explain it. So I made a note. I was like, kind of a weird Air Force story, and a couple of things he said about it just seemed odd. So that was on my list of follow-ups. He mentioned to me that he had knocked around Asia for 3 years before coming home. That's his words. I traveled Asia for 3 years before coming home. I made a note that I wanted to get some clarification on that. He mentioned that he had gone through a really dark period of his life that he wasn't super proud of, but that was after he had a child die. That's a pretty big part of a story. I'd really like to know about that, and especially as a writer, because those things are really delicate. So I want some real hard, boundaries on somebody I'm profiling of like, well, you have a child die and you go off the deep end. How far can I push on that? But that's compelling story. I want to tell that story. And then he talked a little bit about politics, and I'd flagged that. And he wanted, because I had basically accused in the piece I had wrote that had already published at this point, is like, this is pretty politically savvy. You just want to save your seat, this kind of stuff. And he pretty much made no bones about it. He goes, no, he's like, it was because I don't like what the Democratic Party doing. And then he very explicitly talked about his role as a public school teacher. And he said, public school teachers have always been the domain of Democrats, but there's a lot of conservative Republican teachers. And I think I can use that politically to make some difference and to get some power and to change some things. And I want to talk specifically about my ability as an educator. And he wanted to build up that part of his resume, and the fact that he was still a school teacher even while he was in the House of Delegates. At the time, he was in a different role. He'd since moved on to the high school. Again, this is 2023. This is right before he started allegedly grooming this 8th grader to the point that he would eventually have sexual encounters in his own classroom multiple times at Oak Hill High School. This is all stuff he just shared, and these are the notes I made, and I went back to him and was like, "I would really like to know about these points. Just can you clarify it?" Yeah, not accusatory. There may be an explanation for it, but just some things that struck me as very strange. And then I reached out to the school system, just general background, of kind of find out. Was there red flags? Not really. I would love to say there was stuff and we should have caught it and maybe we should find, but there was no way of knowing. When you have somebody who's a predator like this, they get really good at hiding it. One of the things in the charging document that is in the link, and I'll link it for those of you on the podcast and the YouTube, I'll put it so you can find it. Well, you need to read this document yourself. He explicitly told her, because of who I am, meaning his status as a member of the House of Delegates and as a teacher, you can't tell anybody we're doing this. It's going to bring hell, that's his term, down on our lives. It's going to ruin my life. It's going to ruin everything. So he knew what he was doing. The weird uneasiness I got talking to the guy, I just chalked up to politics. Hey, he's a politician. He's being duplicitous. A lot of that in what we do. It's part of the game, but that's inside the boundaries of politics to be duplicitous and switching parties and stuff. So I kind of just wrote it off, even though there's stuff in his bio now that looks really weird. It's like, all right, well, what was he doing in Asia for 3 years? Why was his Air Force service a little hinky? Did he have an issue there? Why, when I reached out and talked to people in the community, it wasn't that there was red flags. It was that there just wasn't a lot there. The teaching people I reached out to in the education system, like, yeah, we don't, nice guy, seems to be a dedicated teacher, but nobody really knew anything about his private life, which is fine. Again, hindsight, it looks different, but it wasn't that there was red flags. There just wasn't any there. It's like he existed as a member of the House of Delegates and he existed as a teacher, and then everything else, there just wasn't a lot there to find out, at least initially. Maybe there'd been more if I dug on it. But when I asked for clarification on these things and we had an appointment set up to do the interview, I sent him a note and say, hey, here's the things I'm going to ask you in the interview ahead of time. These are going to be kind of touchy things. Either tell me what you are not comfortable talking about, or you can send it to me ahead of time so I have the context. And after I'd sent that, I got well, I'm not going to be able to keep our meeting. I'll reschedule. And then I got ghosted and never heard from him again despite multiple attempts. So was that because I was pushing, or he just didn't care and didn't think it was important because he was a little steadier electorally by then? Maybe that's it. But when I heard the news about what he was accused of, it made me absolutely sick. And the timeline reading the affidavit where this party switch and the little bit of interaction I had with him came right before he started grooming this 8th grader, allegedly. You just don't know about people. TJ's commentary, which is excellent, which a lot more people will watch than are watching this. You need to go watch it for yourself, where he says Elliott Pritt had us fooled based on the big show he made about Rayleigh's Law and protecting children on the floor of the House, and he made a big show of it. And there's that now famous photo that's all over the media of him sitting at his desk in the House of Delegates with his head in his hands after hours and hours of fighting for this, and it's not going on. And just the rank, sickening hypocrisy of the fact that at that moment, he was still communicating with this girl. He was still soliciting images from this girl. He had interactions with a girl in his own classroom over a bill designed to protect children while he pounded the table to protect children. The grossness of that's terrible. But is it fooling people, or is there a lesson to learn here? And I think there's a big lesson to learn here, because we're seeing it in other things now. Somebody that abuses a child and grooms a child, that's the extreme example of this. But people that get into politics for just corruption or just personal ambition or to enrich themselves, or people that are working at the behest of other people. And there's all sorts of dirty stuff in politics. We all know this. I think one of the big takeaways is predators are really good at hiding stuff from you. But if you feel something's off about somebody, there's usually a reason for that, and we should pursue it harder. And again, I'm not an investigative journalist by a long shot. If I find stuff like that, and this has happened over the 10 years I've done media, if I find something that I think is really troubling, I got investigative journalists I'll send it to and like, hey, y'all need to look into this because you know how to do this. And I don't do investigations. It's not what I do. I'm a commentator and a writer and a storyteller and an analysis. I analyze what I see and try to put it out. So, should I pass that on to somebody? Yeah, maybe, but we didn't know and nobody else knew either, or we wouldn't be here. Is the story that We now know when he's pounding the table for Rayleigh's Law that he's a predator. Kinda. Is the story that we should take away from this hot mess and this wicked, detestable act that he's accused of, that people can be so pathological that probably in his head, he's talking about protecting children. He meant everybody but him because in his mind, he hadn't done anything wrong. That's the sicker, darker thing that's probably closer to the truth. We'll probably never know. People want power. And the story that I think we should take away from things like this is Elliott Pritt knew he was wrong. He knew he had this situation going on. He knew he had been grooming this girl, and he wanted the power anyway. Even probably knowing logically that the more power and the higher profile you have, the more likely you are to get caught. He did it anyway. He made a big show over Rayleigh's Law, which failed, by the way. And let me throw this in there real quick. There's a lot of people attacking the law itself. It's a flawed law. It's not a perfect law, but it was a legislative effort to try to do something against a wider legislation that is frankly not really interested in doing much of anything to fix the CPS system. There's individuals that want to fix it, but collectively, there's still a lot of pushback to fix it, or we would have already fixed it by now. So it's not about the law. It's about him. Was he putting on a big show? That's something we should take away from? Yeah, absolutely. Is it projecting? Yeah, it probably was. But that's the lengths people will go to use power to do really despicable, evil things. He used his power as a school teacher to get into this girl's private life and groom her into being sexually abused and sexual for him. That's about as low as it gets. When we talk about things like accountability in politics, we don't even conceive it's going to involve things like this. We would just like people to be honest with us. But that's how gross this kind of stuff is to predators that get inside the henhouse. He used his role as a teacher to do this. What was he going to use his role as a member of the House of Delegates in leadership now as assistant majority leader? He's got power. He's got connections. What was he going to use that power for in the future? You wonder, because this guy's only 36 years old. Can you imagine if he had a long career, the damage that could have been done? The other takeaway is, how do we react and respond to this? Was there any way when I had this minor interaction with him on a professional level to know what he was doing or getting into? No. Do I wish I would have known what I know now and we could have followed up, maybe stopped some of this, because this is right before, a few months before he started grooming this individual? Yeah, it feels icky, even though I know there's probably nothing we could have done, nothing I could have done. But you think about that. This is not a game. If you're going to put your name out there and cover politics and you're going to cover news, and I'm saying this because there's more and more of a content. I am all for folk reporters, non-traditional media. I is one. I fell into this. This is my 6th career. I fell into it by accident. But part of that responsibility, if you're going to have your name and you're going to have a following and you're going to have platforms and you're going to put your name out there and you're going to cover this stuff and you're going to comment on politics and laws, and we have excellent state house reporters in the state of West Virginia that are exceptional. But if you're going to put yourself out there, we have to be responsible and understand this isn't just a game for clicks. We have people that are predators. We have people that do really bad things. We have people that will proclaim righteousness really, really loudly while they do really evil stuff in the dark. And that looks like, according to the charging documents, again, he'll have his day in court, Elliott Pritt was one of them. And we all need to take a moment to review our timelines, first of all, how we cover the news, how we did, because a lot of people are just going, Republican pedophile. Okay, fair enough. He was a Republican, but he switched party. He's been both. This was not a partisan issue. This is a wicked human being issue. And look, I'm well on record. I do a lot of critical comments of the West Virginia GOP on a lot of things. The West Virginia GOP could not have responded to this any stronger than they wanted to. They're calling a session. They're asking for an extraordinary session just so they can kick this guy out. Roger Hanshaw came out and stripped him pretty much immediately. I think criticism that they're somehow protecting this guy or whatever, anybody doing that, you need to cut them out of your timeline. They're not interested in news. And I criticize the West Virginia GOP about as much as anybody does. Um, this is a good time to clean up your timeline of how people who cover the news, how they cover it. This is a really good time to remind ourselves that we don't know everything about the people that we see on TV and read about in media, especially elected officials. Um, don't ever idolize these people, hold them to account. They're human beings, and some of them's got some really dark crap. And while it's probably shocking when we find out they're really dark stuff that they're doing, this is an extreme case. Thankfully, most people are not wicked, evil people like he's being accused of being. You need to fall in like, not love with your political figures. They're going to let you down every time if you put them up on a pedestal. And for those of us in the media, understand when stories like this comes up that we have a responsibility to cover it. We have a responsibility to be forthcoming. So that's, laying it out on the table. Yeah, I wrote about this guy. Here's the interaction I had with him. I thought he was kind of a weird flip-floppy guy, but I put it to politics, not him being an actual predator. And if he had consented for me to dig into his life a little bit more, maybe that'd been different, but maybe not. This isn't the first or last political figure that we're going to get in a situation like this, unfortunately. Let's just learn from it. I pray for the victim here. I hope she gets the help she needs. I hope she goes on to have a successful life. I hope she can put her life back together. If convicted or if he pleads guilty, I hope they absolutely throw the book at Elliott Pritt. I hope he gets the max, because you can't be more despicable than what he did here. There's no excuse for it. There's teachers, preachers, priests, religious figures, politicians, office holders that have real power, older people over younger people, all those situations when people are found to be abusive that use power like that, they need to really be punished to the full extent of the law, because that's about as low as it gets. And it breaks down society in ways beyond just what they do to the victims, which is bad enough, but not being able to trust a teacher. My parents are both career educators in the state of West Virginia. I can't tell you how angry people like my father are at stories like this. And by the way, one last thing to defend. I'm not usually the defender of the West Virginia GOP, but they also know they're the ones that passed the law that they can't replace him on the ballot. So the Democrats are going to win this election by default unless they get a conviction before August 11, which probably ain't going to happen unless he pleads guilty. Even if he does that, this is a federal case. It's not going to get in court that fast, probably. The West Virginia GOP is kicking him out, knowing they're going to lose a seat. Now it's a supermajority. They don't care. Ironically, the guy that's going to probably replace him then that's the Democratic nominee is a special education teacher in Fayette County. So there you go. Let's just take a moment to learn here. I did some real hard reflecting on this because it bothered me. I did some review, and that's how I came across my notes, because I keep all my notes and I keep all my messages when I deal with a public official. It's one of the things that when I was trying to learn how to do this stuff, a very seasoned journalist said, keep all your stuff all the time because you never know. And boy, howdy, this is one I wish it hadn't happened, but it happened. Elliott Pritt will go through the legal process. This victim will hopefully get some help and get some justice. There's no justice for what happened to her, but maybe they can get some closure at least and get on with their lives. The West Virginia House needs to expel this guy as quickly as possible, which they're moving to do. And I think they will if he doesn't resign between there. Again, he's in federal prison, so his ability to communicate, we don't know what that situation is. And as for the rest of us, let's keep a clear eye that we are led by people, and power always brings predators who wants to use that power, whether it's in a home situation, a work situation, a church or place of worship situation, or politics. And here's a predator who used both a school system and a political system to do some very vile stuff. I hope we learn from it. I hope we don't have to talk about this ever again. I fear we do. But anyway, I wanted to get that off my chest. I know that's not a normal video I do, but I needed to talk about it. And I will continue to reflect on this, and we'll try to do better in the future. And I hope all of you are well wherever you are. Follow this story. We appreciate you following Her Tell, however you're following this on the podcast. I don't really want to do a pitch because it feels icky because of the subject matter, but we do appreciate you watching, whether it's on the YouTube or the Her Tell Substack, or however you're listening on the podcast stuff. So be well, take care of each other. If you know about abuse, report that crap. If you've been abused, come forward. I know it's a really hard thing to do, but you got to. It's the only way to stop these evil, twisted little bastards to do this stuff. And support people, especially victims, when they come forward. And let's try to make the world a little bit better place, because there's way too many Elliott Pritts in the world who are determined to not let it be so. Hope you all well. Take care. We'll try to do something happier next time. Have a good weekend. Take care of each other.